So welcome everyone to Accounting for Old Cars, and you join me today in Bess, my Mark II 1971 Triumph Vitesse, and this is the 2nd of October, so we're really into autumn, and I have to say it's very mild today. As you can see, we've got the top down, trees are just starting to turn colour, and apart from the noise that we're making, it's actually a very quiet and still day, and it sort of feels like the countryside is holding its breath for the autumn gales yet to come. So one of the reasons for the drive today is this car has just recently had some attention given to the carburetors, and it's quite interesting that in my last video with this I was giving a tour of the car, and one of my subscribers made a comment that the SU carburetors fitted to this car, which are non-standard, appear to be quite small for HS6s, and wondered if I knew what they were. Well, the short answer is that when I went to buy the rebuild kit from Berlin, the SU carburetor specialist in the UK, who I have to say are very, very helpful, neither they or I were really able to identify the carburetors definitively, but we have decided they are not HS6s. So my theory about these having come from one of the big saloons looks as though that just isn't correct, and what we think we've got are HS4s. Now, quite where they've come from at the moment is kind of anybody's guess, and I know that it's taken a couple of goes to sort of set them up. It seems as though we fell victim to the dreaded ethanol and old fuel lines. I think while the car was sort of waiting for its new gearbox, and obviously hadn't been driven for about a month, it seems as though whatever was in the petrol that was in the float bowls of the carburetor eventually settled as a kind of gunge, and it managed to gunge up the floats and the valves, and it meant at one point that we were only actually sort of making any forward progress by virtue of having to use the choke, so that clearly wasn't very satisfactory. So my friend and local mechanic Carol Page, sort of based down the road from me, just outside Framlingham, was very kind and took the car in and was able to sort of strip and reset the carburetors. And Carol is someone who used to race minis back in the 70s and 80s, and I think he can sort of take SU carburetors apart and put them back together again with his eyes shut. And as I say, we're not quite sure whether we've got it set up correctly at the moment, so this is really a case of trying some slow and fast routes just to sort of see how she is. The issue in this car is slightly more complicated by the fact that because the car is fitted with aftermarket or non-standard SU carburetors, the accelerator linkage is also non-standard, and that is a bit of a convoluted Heath Robinson affair, which seems to be using an accelerator pedal and cable from a Triumph Herald, quite an early one, and it doesn't have the very nice smooth action of the rod linkage that the Mark I that I have uses. So there's a kind of on-off feel to this particular car when it comes to using the accelerator, but it's something that I will probably get change at some point. When I first got the car from Tony, it was something that seemed to me to be a huge priority, but I very quickly became used to it, and frankly there were other things that required attention and money, so this has rather been left. Obviously we've got one of these sort of big articulated lorries in front of us at the moment, and this is something we begin to expect on the roads at this time of year here. This looks like one of the grain lorries, and to the uninitiated I should explain that Michaelmas, which is the 29th of September, marks the start of a new farming year. So in theory all the sort of harvesting of corn, so wheat and barley, has taken place by that time, and we're now in the situation where the sort of fruits of that harvest are being transported from grain silos to mills and maltings, and we'll have a period where a lot of the grain is being shuffled around in lorries like this. And then of course as we get into the winter, the next cycle is the sugar beet harvest, and that brings different lorries onto the road, and is a bit of a pain actually for cars like this one, because it brings an enormous amount of mud onto the road as well. So roads around here become a bit hazardous for a period of about sort of 3 to 4 weeks. Coming to a village called Framsden, and this is sort of marked by the fact that it has its own windmill right on the top of a hill, as you'd expect here. It's a nice driving road. Mark II Vitesse, the rear axle setup of the lower wishbones allows me to corner slightly differently. I can sort of chuck this around through the corners in a way that I probably wouldn't be able to in the Mark I. So I can sort of brake a little bit later the corners here. And accelerate out a little bit earlier. In the Mark 1, you kind of have to do your braking in a straight line. And you certainly don't want to lift off mid-corner. The road we're on at the moment is the B1079, which runs between the A140 and the A12, and we're just taking this sort of gentle route back to Woodbridge, and I've just noticed that I need to fill up with petrol. In terms of the carburetor setup, having sort of driven it for a few miles, I suspect that we've got the mismatch between the carburetor needles and the camshaft here. At high RPM is excellent. But what I've noticed is the tractability low down is not perhaps what it ought to be for one of these cars. And as I said, sometimes the problem sort of masked by this kind of on-off throttle response because of the convoluted throttle cable. But I think changing out the needles might be an idea. Let's say sort of 2000 RPM where we are at the moment, it feels a little bit fluffy. Now we're over 2000, sort of a different thing. It's one of the difficulties of taking on a car that has a history that is so unknown, and as I say, I think when this car was sort of pulled out of its barn in Scotland in 1999, a lot of the work that was done to it was sort of done on a budget, understandably, because in those days these cars really weren't worth very much money. I mean, they're not terribly valuable now, but I imagine back then it might have had a value of maybe 2,500–3,000. And so I think there was also quite a lot of spare parts available then. There are lots of other examples which were sort of still in the barns or being scrapped. So it was relatively easy to sort of get hold of second-hand components. And I suspect the restorer simply took whatever he could lay his hands on just to get the car back on the road. And I'm not complaining about that. I actually applaud it, because if that person hadn't been that way inclined, then the car just wouldn't exist. I also quite like the fact that it has this sort of air of mystery about it, and every time we do some work on it, it's a bit like having to become a detective and try to piece together, you know, where these bits may or may not have come from. Nothing else, it makes Bess completely unique. Well, I hope you enjoyed this short blast out with me today. Look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.